Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast post-game edition. Matt Prehm, Jared Mack, Erik Skopil on this Saturday morning podcast after a Friday night football game. Oregon 31, Michigan State 10. I don't think the score shows any idea how wide of a gap this was. I feel like in the third quarter, Oregon was kind of playing with its food a little bit, like they were against UCLA. We saw some funky plays. Oregon went into halftime leading 21-0. Michigan State had like 102 yards of total offense. This is a game in which, the offense didn't play great the entire time, but goddamn, the defense was amazing.
Yeah, I think there's going to be things that people choose to gripe about, but This was a really impressive performance, with the exception of 2 interceptions in the red zone, which are concerning because it's become a bit of a trend now, 2 straight weeks where there's been issues there. Mm-hmm. And then the last thing people might gripe about is the fact that it wasn't a shutout because the second and third stringers came in and gave up a touchdown and a field goal in the fourth quarter. But I thought this was awesome. Are they playing perfect? No. Are you entering Ohio State having seen Oregon play, its best football for 4 quarters? Not yet. Would you like to be there? Yeah, absolutely. You'd like to have seen them, I should say, play a perfect game. And a couple years ago, it was like that BYU game early on in the season in 2022, where it was like everything just kind of clicked. And last year it seemed like right off the bat, games like that. We haven't seen everything firing yet, but I still continue to be like the ceiling for this team feels really, really high. And if they do put it together, they can compete with anybody. So I guess we'll learn how high the ceiling is and what this team's ceiling is and who they can and can't compete with a bit next week against Ohio State. But this was a total butt kick. It wasn't a competitive football game. It looks closer than it was. And again, Oregon very easily could have won this game like 37-0 had a couple of things gone differently. And that's a pretty good place to be at coming out of this one.
Yeah, 3 straight weeks now where Oregon has had, or not weeks, but 3 straight games, I should say, where Oregon has had just killer wins. Again, complete domination. This kind of felt similar-ish to the UCLA one where, there's 1 touchdown the entire game for the opposing team. And it came, obviously, last week on the pick 6. This week it comes in garbage time when Michigan State still had all of their starters in and Oregon had probably 80 to 90% backups in. And it was nice to see all the backups on the field. Shows you kind of like what the difference is between second level and first level players. But yeah, overall, I thought it was just a complete dominating win. By halftime, especially after the third touchdown of the half to Evan Stewart in the left corner in the end zone, the game was over. There was absolutely nothing that Aiden Childs and Michigan State's offense could do. If they wanted to run the ball, they were getting stopped for 2 to 3 yards. If they wanted to throw the ball and it was a play action, their offensive line just physically could not stop Jordan Burch, Mateo Uiagalelei, or Derek Harmon from rushing on the interior. It was complete dominant effort. Like Eric ended, the score could have, easily been 40-something to 17. You got to factor in the fumble that Michigan State had in the first quarter and say, that probably would have happened as well. But even if they scored on this wasn't close. It was 102 yards at halftime for Michigan State, something like that, and 44 of them came on 1 play on 4th and 2 in the first quarter. So it was a great win for Oregon. I thought it was potentially a trap game just because everybody's looking forward to the Ohio State game next week, but they didn't play like it.
23 total yards or passing yards, excuse me. By Michigan State in the second and third quarters. To Jared's point, when they tried to throw the football, it was disaster because Childs, it really wasn't necessarily Childs was missing targets. He just didn't have time. There was a series where they had 3 straight sacks. I know one of them didn't count technically as a sack. It was a rush for 0 yards, but it was essentially a sack Mark Caldwell. 3 straight. And I don't know, I can't rack my brain when that has happened in a game for Oregon. We've seen it other times, but for Oregon specifically, it's been a while since they've had 3 straight plays where it was 3 straight sacks. And focus, like Eric said, that people are going to talk about the negative plays for the offensive side of the football and the Dylan Gabriel interceptions. Like those were just really bad decisions, really bad plays. But I think I wrote about it on the site on duckterritory.com. Like, and I think this identity of this team has shifted, and it's not going to be a team that's going to score 50 points a game like they did last season and basically come right out of the gates on fire offensively. It's a dominant front seven. It's a team that's leaning into its defense, and they're doing what they're supposed to do. They're defensively, they're doing the equivalent of scoring 50 points a game offensively. Like it's a different style of football. And I think for the first time since Willie Taggart was hired at Oregon, so 2017, Taggart brought it up. Cristobal certainly brought it up. Lanning, I don't think I ever has specifically cited it, but those around the national media talk about bringing the SEC style of football to Oregon. Like, this is what SEC football is. They just destroy you defensively, and then they grind you out with the offensive game, with a running attack. And this is what we're seeing. And it's okay if this is not a team that's going to score 50 a game, like we kind of thought. Maybe not that. I'm being exaggerating a little bit, but like,
right, yeah,
into its defense, and they're really freaking good. And I celebrate that. And they've got issues to fix offensively, but right now, if they play like this defensively against Ohio State, they're going to have a chance.
Yeah, I agree. And this is now basically 10 consecutive quarters of top-tier football from this defense. I even think the first half against Oregon State, there were some frustrating moments, but those were still grinded-out drives. Like, when was the last time an explosive play, like, really, really cost this defense? Like, it just hasn't really happened.
Boise State.
Yeah, Boise State.
The Herbert fumble.
Right. That's exactly the last time. And today it almost did. To Jared's point, Oregon's defense came up big, forced a fumble on the goal line. That came after a 44-yard pass. But 10 straight quarters now, one touchdown allowed. That touchdown was against the second-team defense tonight. Obviously, there was a touchdown scored by UCLA last week. That was a defensive score. But this defense is playing at a really, really high level. I think at every phase, pretty much. Like, you think about, this is 2 consecutive weeks with less than 60 rush yards allowed. Michigan State finishes with 59. I want to say it was like 47 for UCLA. This is
exactly
the whole season. There's been no pass attack against this defense. Tonight didn't force any turnovers through the air, by the way, which was a little weird. But 191 yards through the air. They had the one explosive early. Everything else was difficult. Matt and Jared both talked about it. Pass rush really impacted a lot for Childs. I think after the first 2 or 3 drives, it just kind of felt like things were going too quick for him. He was kind of getting a little bit rushed in his progressions. He was throwing the ball into the ground. He was, when he wasn't, pressured, it felt like he was pressuring himself almost. So this defense is going to give this team a chance next week, I think. We can get into the offensive stuff in a moment here, but I think we need to spend the first 10, 15 minutes talking about how great this defense is, because I think the last time Oregon's had a defense quite like this was probably 2019.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Really good defense. The ceiling for this defense, and again, we're not even halfway through the season, I think is substantially higher than that one. I think there's, especially in the front seven, not to take anything away from that group, but that was KT as a true freshman. That was a bunch of other guys up front who aren't, frankly, NFL players. There's NFL guys on this defense all over, especially in the front seven. And boy, are they making it difficult on opposing offenses right now.
They sure are. And I'm very happy about it as the defensive guy. It's all kind of just coming together in terms of what a Dan Lanning defense is. Like, when you go back and look at his Georgia teams, I'm not comparing this one to those Georgia teams because those were absurd, and maybe this one can get to something of that degree, but those were riddled with future first round picks and yada yada. So, but it's what you want. They're fast to the ball. They have linebackers who can drop back and play coverage. They have linebackers who can run up and play the run game. They have edge rushers who are disruptive. They have interior guys who are disruptive and can fill up gaps in the rushing lanes. They have guys that they trust in terms of the secondary. Jabbar Muhammad shuts down one side of the field. They do enough with Nico Reed and Dante Manning. And then their safeties, to Eric's point earlier, they haven't been tested. It'll be interesting to see what happens against Ohio State, just because they'll have way more of a vertical passing attack than what we've seen so far with Oregon's opponents. But still, they're still playing really well. Tysheem Johnson was pretty good today. Kobe Savage just really hasn't been tested, but he's still really solid in the run game. So it's all positive there. And it was just great to watch the defensive line. Like, this is kind of how I envisioned on what this defensive line could be, the potential of just like you can't double team anybody on this line, because if you do so, someone who's really good and can get to the quarterback basically anytime they line up will be one-on-one coverage. And basically everybody for Oregon is one-on-one coverage, and guys are just taking advantage of it. You heard Dan talk about it with Jordan Birch after the game, where it's like, we're scheming to get Jordan Birch one-on-one coverage, and he's winning. And he won a lot tonight with 2.5 sacks, and he was a monster. You can see his like NFL potential and his real potential as a player just growing every single game now. So that's going to be a fun matchup to watch next week, specifically at against Ohio State. But it was a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to watch this defense just fly around and do the right things.
Yeah, we'll learn a lot about like how truly elite this defense could be or is next week. It's probably the most talented team they'll face offensively for the season. Probably even in the playoffs. And there'll be a bunch of one-on-one matchups that'll be really enticing. But tonight it was yet again, just multiple guys. To Jared's point, like, they have a lot of guys that have either significantly improved from a development standpoint, or they're two offseason additions, Jamari Caldwell and Derek Harmon. Like, we talked about it at length in the offseason. Like, did they add enough talent? Did they find enough guys in the portal? Maybe they needed to add one more. Like, yeah, you always would love to add another huge game-changing piece along the front seven, but Harmon and Caldwell are as good as advertised, if not better, and they were highly thought of when they showed up. But I think Tatum Tuiota's development, Jordan Birch's development, you look at Mateo's development as well, and then you factor in, like, from a linebacker perspective, Devin Jackson and Bryce Betcher's improvements. Justin Jacobs is like the fourth guy and at linebacker, and they haven't missed a beat. I mean, I've thought about this ever since, I think, after UCLA, when the Oregonians' James Crepea just kept hounding about how the linebacker play is its best it's ever been in the Lanning era, probably the best it's ever been in the last 4 or 5 years. And it's true. Like, across the board, they have developed and they have acquired elite talent. And to your guys' point about the 2019 defense, that this is as good of a defense as that. It was one of the best in the country. And I think potential-wise, and that's always a hard word, dangerous word to play with, but this group could be significantly better than that 2019 team. To your point, Eric, like, there's NFL guys at all three levels. There was a bunch of NFL scouts at this game tonight to watch Oregon specifically and some of these matchups, and they're starting to play to what we envisioned it would look like. And I think you have to get around the idea that this is going to be a defensive-oriented team this season. And then it's strange to say, because historically, Oregon's been known as the sexy, fast team that scores a bunch of points and just kind of gets by defensively.
How many sacks do you think Jordan's going to have this year? He's at 5 through 5 games. And if they play a full season here in terms of some postseason, the school record, I was just looking at this, is 13 by Ernest Jones and Nick Reed. If he's playing
5 right now, it's 13. That seems
– It seems attainable. It seems attainable if they play a long enough season, right? So that's something I'm thinking about with him, is 7 tackles for loss, 5 sacks through 5 games is really, really impressive production. And not that the sack total doesn't necessarily defines him as a player, but there were a lot of times last year where he came up really close but didn't finish those plays. And I don't some of that circumstance, right? Like, whatever, but I think you've seen growth there. I think Dan even said tonight he's playing kind of with a mean streak. He's playing with a level of aggression.
Playing with violence.
Violence is what he's saying. That's a better word. And you see that on the field. The plays he's making are really impressive. And this is going to be really fascinating, I think, next week. And we'll get into, obviously, Ohio State. Finally, it's here. We can talk about it more and more. But I'm going to be really interested to see these kind of matchups. Like, no one's really been able to stop Jordan Birch this year. Ohio State's offensive line was looked at as kind of a weakness going into the season. It's probably hard to measure if it is or not. Maybe we'll get an idea tomorrow against Iowa because they have some boys up front for sure. But I'm curious to see how much that translates against Ohio State. Like, is Birch just a game wrecker regardless of opponent? That's going to be something I'll be keeping an eye on because, again, through 5 games, this is about as good as Oregon's had from a pass rush, certainly since Kayvon Thibodeau. And from a production perspective, he can certainly, I think, finish with more sacks, tackles for loss than KT ever did in a season.
Yeah, 100%. And like you said, with the potential full slate, single season sack rate, it's going to be hard just because Oregon will be playing better offensive lines in the future. But no one can really stop him. And again, if he's single coverage, you have to like that matchup if you're Dan Lanning and company.
Before we talk offense, I think we just real quick. Andrew Boyle, 50-yard field goal.
Yeah, welcome back.
Matt Evenson's the last player since 2008 is when he did it. 52-yard field goal against ASU. 50-yarder, though, and that thing could have been good from, 55, maybe even further than that. It was a boot. Real positive to see. And Eric and I were talking about this during the game. Just strange, interesting decision to kind of rotate between kickers with the Sappington and Boyle on PATs. Boyle has the bigger leg for the field goal. Maybe that's why he got the look from 50. But nonetheless, good Oregon special teams. 2 weeks in a row. Some good kicks here.
Yeah, Boyle's a really weird story. Jared, the last time we saw him was the end of 2022, I think.
Yeah, right? I think so, yeah.
Guy didn't play at all last year. He'd been on the injury report as out, I think, for every game coming into this one. He was to me, it was a bit of a surprise he wasn't on the injury report. And it was an even bigger surprise that he was attempting kicks and then making a 50-yarder, which, as Matt said, longest kicks in 16 years. So I would be curious to see what the responsibilities are between these two going forward. I would imagine Boyle is the long-range kicker. Sappington's more of the guy in shorter ranges. I don't know what the split will be exactly, but you have to like it. And to Matt's point, that kick was good for several yards. That was a boot. And Oregon hasn't had – its kicking game has probably been, of every phase of the game, its biggest weakness this program has had for basically my entire life. There hasn't been a whole lot of just solid kickers. There's been a lot of games lost by poor kicking. I'd like to see a kid kick it 50 yards and do it with pretty strong ease. So that was kind of an interesting storyline today because I just didn't think we'd see him play, and then he went out there and had the longest kick in almost 2 decades.
What a guy, and he's back. So love that for the team. Love that for the special teams. Let's jump into the offense.
Yeah.
So look, Oregon. Obviously, should we start with the red zone interceptions? I think we should probably just kind of get that out of the way. Just 2 late throws from Gabriel. First one just across the end zone. Dylan running to his left, just sees Patrick Herbert too late. Guy makes a hell of a catch, diving across his body reception, which very easily could have been an incomplete pass, but he held on to it. It was a great play. Second one, rolling out to his right, across his body, just does not have the arm strength to make that throw to Tez. And even so, I'm not exactly sure how open Tez Johnson was at any given moment on that route. So those were 2 plays that he forced. This comes after last week where he forced another throw to Addison and the pick 6, but wasn't Dylan Gabriel's best day at the office. 257 yards, 2 tuds, 2 interceptions, 63% completion percentage. Just there's some drops, but also just a couple missed throws. And it didn't hurt Oregon in the end because the offensive, the rush game was great with Jordan James, but it wasn't his best day at the office. And you hope that is not a trend. You hope that this trend of throwing red zone interceptions is not something that continues to happen or missing open receivers. But this is 2 weeks in a row with some pretty bad reads, bad reactions in the red zone, which isn't necessarily encouraging.
I was sort of just surprised to see similar decisions take place 2 consecutive games. Because this is a veteran guy. And these plays weren't all. There's 3 interceptions. They weren't identical plays. I think to your point, Jared, the second one to Tez tonight feels different from the other ones in terms of I I think that was him just forcing the ball somewhere that he's not able to get enough velocity to. And I don't even know if, like, I agree with you. I don't know if that was really, I don't know how many quarterbacks could have fitted in there or would have even probably tried. But you don't, like, these are big mistakes. Like, if these interceptions are happening at midfield and no points are scored off of them, or I should say, like, points aren't directly taken off the board for Oregon, basically, you're concerned, but not crazy concerned. I'm just concerned that these are 3 times, I think 2 of the 3 on third down from within the 10-yard line, in places where if you just throw the ball away, you kick the field goal, you get 3 points, and that's a way more satisfying way to end a drive. And again, credit to Oregon's defense for this week at least keeping the momentum from shifting, because neither of those drives for Michigan State went anywhere. I think maybe 1 first down and then punt for both. But I was just a little bit concerning. These were kind of similar mistakes in terms of the decision to put the ball in places that maybe it didn't need to be, in parts of the field where if you just throw the ball away, which you expect the veteran quarterback to do, you come away with points. And I think my last part on this is, and he kind of even alluded to it, but you can make these mistakes in a game like tonight and against UCLA, and it doesn't really matter. You still win big. But when you play against Ohio State and the margin is so small, you can't be wasting red zone trips. Like, think about the Washington game last year. And it wasn't that they threw interceptions there, but they wasted those red zone trips. And that's what was the difference between winning that regular season game up in Seattle and losing. And so a game like Ohio State, where, again, the margins are so small, you can't be coughing up those plays. You can't be coming away empty when you get the ball to the 10-yard line. And we also know Dylan's a gamer. He played great last year in the Red River rivalry, the Red River shootout against Texas. That was like his marquee game at Oklahoma. So we know we can do it on the big stage. But these last 2 games, these specific 3 plays are plays that can really, really cost you, and absolutely could be plays that would cost you a game against Ohio State, where you're not going to have a 2 or 3 score cushion like they have.
He was asked if he felt like he's been pressing a little bit, and he kind of said no, kind of danced around the question. But I kind of wonder that, like, there was mountains of expectations with this offense and mountains of expectations with him, and understandably so. Like, it was all justified, but I wonder if, like, they've got there's this idea that Oregon's offense has to look a certain way, and I wonder if there's just a little bit of internal pressure to just live up to those expectations and have this offense be so good and look what it was like last season with Bo Nix. And while he's not trying to, like, be Bo Nix, but there's that expectation that your offense has to be really good, and they're not there, obviously. And I kind of wonder, maybe he is pressing a little bit. Maybe he is learning that, hey, like, what does Will Stein talk about with Bo Nix, and what has he talked about with with Dylan Gabriel? Like, take the easy play. Don't force things. Just take the easy play. And that felt like the last drive of the first half. That's exactly what it was. Like, Dan Lanning was asked, like, do you have a conversation? And he said yes. They talked with Dylan Gabriel, but they have a lot of faith in him that he knows he's a gamer. He'll figure things out. But I just really wonder, like, if we got Truth Serum, if it was Will Stein and Dan Lanning going to him after that second one, and just saying, like, hey, just take what the defense is giving you. Don't force it, because the offense is good enough where if you just get our guys the ball, you'll march down the field and score a touchdown. And that's exactly what happened in that last drive of the second quarter. Like, he didn't force a single throw, and every single time he hit a guy, it was either for like 7 or 8, 9 yards or a first down thrown through the air, and it was easy plays. He didn't really hold the ball for long. He instantly knew where he was going, and it was just boom, 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 and then went all the way down the field, really efficient. It was probably, like, I feel like their best drive offensively, maybe, of the entire season, where they went the whole length of the field and relied strictly on the pass.
Yeah, that was a really good drive. I'm glad you brought that one up. It was also a necessary drive because, 2 first half interceptions, both on the red zone that we just talked about. But also, it's just a 2-score game at that point. And while it was very clearly that Oregon was the more dominant team there in every category and on the field. It's 2 scores. It didn't necessarily reflect that. And, if they get stopped and Michigan State just has another one of those plays where it's like a 30, 40-yard gain and suddenly they're in the 10 and they score, it's a 1-score game. And then everybody's like, what the heck is going on again? But they did it. They went down the field. It was a really slow, methodical 2-minute drive. It was 13 plays to go 65 yards in a minute 58. So
that's hard to do.
Very hard to do. Yeah. They did a great job of just progressively going down the field, just little chunks at a time. Thought Dan did a really good job with his clock management. They spent their last time out with 10 seconds left, so they had the opportunity to obviously score the touchdown, which was really good. Or if there wasn't anything there, throw it away. Still have a couple seconds left, end it with a field goal. Unlike the other drives where they got down in the red zone and Gabriel forced it. I thought Will Stein, I just want a quick side note, I thought Will Stein was tremendous tonight. I thought he was really in his bag. He did a lot of cool stuff that, people had been saying the offense was kind of stagnant and it wasn't really creative and it wasn't giving the ball to their playmakers. Like, none of that was true to begin with. But then tonight, Will Stein was just like, look, we're going to show some tricks. We're going to do some things that are really strange. Just a lot of motions, which I think is really good. It's the new trend in the NFL as well. But a lot of interesting personnel, a lot of Amari Washington as a fullback, a lot of like weird wing formations for the running back. So I thought it was a really good overall offensive game, and we haven't really talked about the offensive line, but I thought they did a good job as well. Michigan State played much better against the run in the second half, but first half, guards, tackles were pulling, counter plays were happening. Jordan James was finding holes, like just a dominant rushing performance in the first half. So again, I know people will focus on the negatives of the red zone interceptions. Like Dan said in his press conference, playing college football is hard. Sometimes people make mistakes. We're so prone to thinking that quarterbacks can't make mistakes because of what Bo Nix has done the last 2 years. Not that this is the normal to throw 2 red zone interceptions, but it could be a whole lot worse. And despite Dylan having an off night, he was still pretty darn good. Still made a lot of plays with his arm, with his legs. So it is not, again, it's not like trouble over paradise with this offense. It's doing just fine.
There were 2 sequences with Dylan that were really impressive. We just touched on the probably the most impressive, which was coming down in that last drive and honestly having kind of the gumption to throw the ball in that window to Evan on, I think that was 4th down. I mean, that's like that ball is incomplete. I think it's another empty drive. And I thought that was impressive. And then the other one was after just getting his wind knocked out. He took a big shot on that pass to Trayshawn, which, by the way, awesome catch from his back. They score, he caps the drive with the QB keeper where he has to kind of run through some guys, but just kind of showing like he's not afraid of the moment. Like I thought that was great. And like, yeah, the expectations of him being the Heisman Trophy favorite preseason, the expectations he would go out and just replicate what Bo did, those are all probably a little bit unfair. And he's not going to do that. He's already thrown as many picks this year as Bo threw all of last year. He's been sacked more times than Bo was sacked last year. He might be close to as accurate and he might put up huge stats, but it's probably never going to be exactly what Bo did. And that's totally fine. This offense can still be really productive like it was today. And this team can still win a lot of games, even if he's not quite to that level. And just building off your point on Will, I thought the most interesting sequence of plays came on that first drive in the third quarter. Back-to-back plays, they did things they haven't done all season. First, they had the direct snap to Jordan James where Dylan kind of came in motion. He had like the fake kind of like jet sweep there, and Jordan ran for a nice gain. And then the play right after that, they did like the swinging gate. They pulled like Kenny Dillingham. They did like a really funky formation where you had half the offensive line in one spot, half over there. And I don't think that ended up doing a ton, but the reason I bring those up is if Will is as good of a play caller as I think he is, he'll do what Kenny did a lot of in 2022, which is they show these kind of funky, exotic, formations and plays, and then they'll build off of it. And I think there's going to be I think part of the reason that drive, when the game felt kind of at hand, part of the reason you do that is to put a couple things on film for Ohio State to at least spend some time on, and whether or not you come back to those or not, you at least are kind of forcing them to like think about a couple of things you might do.
That's what I thought too. Yeah.
So I just you brought up the play calling, that really stood out to me. But we need to finish kind of this podcast and especially the offense, just having a Jordan James love fest, because I thought he was awesome today. And what was it, Matt? This was the most rush yards from an Oregon back since who and since when?
Travis Dye in the Alamo Bowl of 2021 when he had, I think, 212 yards or so. 166 for Jordan James. So more yards than Bucky, more yards than Noah last year or 2 years ago. It's one of the best performances in a while. So almost 7 yards to carry, 6.9 yards on 24 attempts. And quite honestly, like, you just talked about like the exotic formations and plays that we saw from Stein and to open the third quarter. Like, James's number could have been over 200 if they wanted to just come out in the second half and run the ball and be committed to just getting out of here real quick with, shortening the clock. Because I don't think he had more than 7 carries in the second half, eight carries. A lot of this damage, all of it basically came in the first half. So this was an impressive performance, and B, honestly, something that like it's comforting to see. Like, lowest rushing average per carry going into this game in 8 years for Oregon football at just 4.32 yards. And, it was an explosive offensive performance. And I think a lot of what overall big arching success that they had you can stem back to it starting up front in the offensive line. 7 plays of 10 or more yards, 7 runs resulted in 131 yards of rushing for Oregon's offense tonight.
Sorry, I was looking at stats. I don't have a lot more to say. It was a very good rushing attack from Jordan James and company.
I was also looking at stats just to kind of give the second half splits here. So in the second half, it looks like he carried it 8 times for like 12 yards. Yeah, The second half was a totally different half. First half, he was on pace for like a 300-yard day, which you're never going to achieve unless you're Ashton Genty. But I think you want to give credit to Jordan. I also think the offensive line played its best game, and our Michigan State reporter Steven, who was on our podcast earlier this week, was asking me after the game, like, give me the context on Oregon's offensive line. Like, what was this? Because he came away thinking that they just completely kicked Michigan State's ass. And he's right. Like, they did. Like, Oregon up front was dominant in this game. And he wanted to know, like, how bad is this for Michigan State? Like, is this a bad offensive line that just beat up on them? And I said, I think it's an offensive line that when they find their footing could be really good, but it's just been this game and kind of the Oregon State game where they've really found their footing, especially in the run game. And I thought this was really encouraging going into the Ohio State game. Do I think this translates directly to playing the Buckeyes? I probably don't. Like, there's just a lot of NFL guys in that front 7.
Yeah.
It's going to be tough. I don't expect Oregon to have a running back go for that kind of yardage with that kind of efficiency. But I do think you have to feel encouraged by the fact that their best run games have come in the last couple of weeks. Well, 2 of the last 3 games, because UCLA wasn't fantastic. But this performance in particular, seeing Jordan early on in that game with that 41-yard run, a couple other chunk runs in the first half, like him breaking tackles, his ability to make guys miss, but also to kind of run through contact, like all the stuff that we like about this guy was on display. And I thought this was great. And I thought it was really impressive up front, the way especially the guards and Poncho played, because that's been the big concern all season. And I thought for, 3 quarters plus or whatever, because, the second unit came in late, I thought those guys definitely did their job and probably did their job as well as they've done all season.
I just think it's an offensive line, and it's an offense in general that's kind of growing and learning to play together. There's a lot of newness to this offensive unit. A new quarterback, a new center, a new starting running back. Yep. You've got another offensive lineman that's new as well. Like, the day and age, like this is a unit that last year everyone was back basically along the offensive line. Everyone was back along the offensive line. They had their quarterback back. Even though it was a different center, like JPJ played a lot. He learned under Forsyth, and he had multiple years of learning the position. And he came in to the program playing the position. And this year's center was a guy that came in as a guard and they moved him to center, and it's his second year in the system and first year playing full-time center. So I think what we're seeing is just the growing pains of a team that has extremely high expectations, fair or not, and they're learning to play together still. And this is the age of the transfer portal where you're going to have some teams, you're going to have some years where the chemistry and the learning to play together and the checks and the reads and individual stuff is going to take time, and you have to do it during the season and playing at a high level. And that's a lot of pressure to do. All right, that's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles Podcast. We'll have more coverage of this game on duckterritory.com, as well as some early talk and coverage of Oregon, Ohio State. Buckeyes come to Autzen, 4:30 kick on NBC next Saturday. You've got a weekend off of Duck football. Enjoy the games, and we'll be back next week breaking down this matchup, Ducks-Bucks, coming up on – you're listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.